Let's talk to Trevor Kavanagh, former political editor, I should say, at The Sun. Trevor, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
I find it more and more incredulous with every week that passes how inept this government appears to be. Let me play you an interview that Keir Starmer did at the weekend with Laura Kuenssberg. You probably saw it, but this is how he described the winter fuel allowance and why it was necessary.
On that 22 billion, I want everybody watching this to know and understand that nearly half of that 22 billion, £9 billion, comes from decisions that your government has made to give many public sector workers pay rises above inflation, including junior doctors getting 22% of an increase over 2 years. So again, when it comes to winter fuel allowance, that was a choice. It was a political decision for the reasons that you say you want to sort out the economy. But how can you justify it to viewers who feel like it is an attack on some people who've worked hard all their lives? They're not wealthy, they don't have money to spare, and this year, if it's cold, they're going to be looking at the thermostat and wondering if they can pay their bills.
I'm absolutely convinced that we will only deliver that change. I'm absolutely determined we will, if we do the difficult things now. I know they're unpopular, I know they're difficult, of course they're tough choices.
Well, it's worse than unpopular, Trevor. You know, by their own research, when Labour were in opposition, they worked out that if they pulled this particular benefit from pensioners, 4,000 pensioners would die.
That's right, and this is a Labour government running around, ripping pensioners off the allowances that they were given by Gordon Brown as an act of mercy to get them through cold winters. It's an astonishing decision. The figures about 4,000 deaths may well have been made up on a fag packet by the government or the opposition at the time in order to embarrass the Tories, who were thinking of doing that very thing. And certainly it was something so severe in terms of criticism that the Tories dropped the policy. And now Labour is picking it up and taking off the £300 that an awful lot of pensioners do rely on now to heat their homes during the worst parts of winter.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I mean, we keep going back to things that were said before they became the government. We've had Rachel Reeves talking about visiting a pensioner and feeling terrible when she shook her hand because it was so cold and it was in the winter. And she talks about how, you know, pensioners must always be looked after by their government. Keir Starmer back in 2022 said, looking ahead to winter is frightening. I've met pensioners who have no idea how they'll heat their homes, parents who will have to skip meals so their kids can eat. The Tories are too busy fighting each other to notice Labour has a plan that meets the scale of this crisis. Well, not only are they not cutting people's energy bills, they're actually increasing their cost of living by taking away an allowance.
They are, and the thing about this is that the Starmer said that he had to hand out all this money to the unions as soon as he walked into number 10. He didn't have to, and the amount of money that's going to be saved by cutting this £300 benefit could easily have been skimmed off to the top of that pay award if he'd asked those or demanded from those unions some sort of productivity deal which would have made at least the big £11 billion payoff worth the while in terms of some sort of return to the taxpayers. It could have easily saved that £2 billion or whatever figure it is. It's not much less. I mean, it's a question of choices, and they've made a political choice, and it's the wrong one.
Well, every choice they seem to be making appears to be the wrong one. I mean, similarly, the front page of The Sun this morning, a great story, exclusive by Julia Atherley. Probation staff are warning that the mass early release of 2,000 prisoners tomorrow will swamp the service and fuel crime. About 5,500 will be freed by mid-October in a bid to ease prison overcrowding. But basically, the probation office has said that they're going to be overwhelmed. They haven't got enough time to make plans for this. Keir Starmer's been very tetchy when he's been asked questions about, you know, can he guarantee the safety of the British people? Because he can't. A lot of these people being released are violent offenders. Many of them are sex offenders. Some of them are domestic violence offences that they've been locked up for. You know, he cannot possibly expect nothing bad to happen from this.
The thing to bear in mind about this, Mike, is that people don't go to prison these days unless they've done not just one crime, but usually a whole series of crimes, which they've already been let off with a warning or a slap on the wrist. It's not until they've done something really serious that they get locked up in the first place. So these are going to be people who will have nothing left to do when they leave those prisons but to carry on committing crime. and they will go back into prison. But in the meantime, they will wreak violence on the innocent British public.
Well, that's right. And, I mean, you know, he was told this many, many weeks ago, I think one of his early press conferences in Downing Street, when he was asked about this, and he gave a similar answer to the one he gives when he's asked about two-tier policing. You know, very dismissive, kind of, you know, slightly tetchy, slightly kind of angry, doesn't really want to answer it. Of course, everyone's going to be fine. Of course, we're going to monitor them. Well, the probation officer thinks they can't.
No, I think tetchiness is the trademark of the Starmer regime, and Starmer personally. He is incredibly thin-skinned and humorless. And I think that he takes umbrage over things which are quite legitimate criticisms or even simple questions about what he's doing. And his response inevitably is, I am absolutely convinced, I am absolutely certain. And yet he has no evidence for being absolutely certain when he makes these statements. No. He just simply trots out a bit of dogma and insists that we have to swallow it.
Well, exactly right. And I mean, back in the first Prime Minister's questions last Wednesday, he wasn't even sure who the Prime Minister was. He refers to Rishi Sunak as the Prime Minister 5 times. And you think, that doesn't look like a man who's at ease in his job. He doesn't look happy. He looks under pressure. He was very, very sort of fidgety yesterday as he was answering questions. And have a look at this when he was asked about the removal of a woman that you knew very closely and with whom you shared a great deal of policy decision-making, shall we say. Keir Starmer on why he removed the Thatcher portrait.
This is not actually about Margaret Thatcher at all. I don't like images and pictures of people staring down at them. I've had it all my life. When I was a lawyer, I used to have sort of pictures of judges staring. I don't like it. I like landscapes. So this is my study, it's my private place where I go to work. I didn't want a picture of anyone. It's a picture of landscapes. As a lawyer, people tried to persuade me that I needed pictures of judges staring at me the whole time. I didn't like it. I don't like it anymore if they're politicians. There isn't any politician staring at me in my study where I just get on with the work I need to get on with.
He's wrong on all counts there, by the way, Trevor, because James Heal from The Spectator pointed out over the weekend that he does in fact have an office in Parliament in which there are several studies, 5 portraits and a bust of former Prime Ministers Churchill, Pitt, Melbourne, Disraeli and Peel. He's also got a whole house full of portraits in Downing Street, and the room he refers to is not in any way, shape or form his private study. It is a media interview room, effectively. So he doesn't sit there and read books all the time. It's a very odd thing to explain like that, isn't it?
Well, I watched that interview and I thought that it was a very glib and rather pathetic excuse. I think that, you know, this comes back to the point we just made about how thin-skinned and tetchy he is.
Yeah.
He doesn't like being looked down upon. Well, I don't think that anyone would regard that portrait as looking down on anyone. It is the portrait of a woman who changed this country for the better and deserves the credit for doing so. And indeed was commissioned by Starmer's predecessor, Gordon Brown, as an indication of his respect for that woman who led the country in the way that she did so successfully. I think that what we're seeing here already in the first less than 100 days of a new Labour government is Starmer with the wheels coming off. Yeah. And, you know, this revolt over the pensions issue, the heating allowance and a few other things that are looming in the background, I think this is the beginning of an awful lot of unease in the Labour ranks. And I've spoken to a few Labour MPs who are also worried about the crackdown on the freedom of speech, which is coming in universities. So, you know, this is a very restive party. It's a coalition of people who don't have a great deal in common these days. It's not the party of unity that it might have been once under, say, John Smith or Tony Blair or other previous leaders, indeed Gordon Brown. And I think it's going to fall apart gradually over time. Yeah,
I think so. And that was another curious answer that he gave yesterday when he was asked, you know, whether if anyone voted against the bill, the winter fuel cut, whether they would lose the Labour whip. And instead of saying yes or no, he said, oh, well, that would be a matter for the whip's office. Well, why? You know, he's the guy running the country, he's running the Labour Party. Why would he be only passing the buck to them?
Well, Wes Streeting said that it would be a matter for the whip's office and the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is running the country, you're absolutely right. But he is running scared. He knows that there are lots of little revolutions or rebellions looming over a number of things, not least within the party over its Muslim contingent.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really dare, I think. And this is where the problem arises of having a very large majority. People feel freer in those circumstances to express their own individual views rather than the party line. And this is what's going to happen. And while in the period before the election, he did actually sack or suspend a number of MPs for rebellion, that was in a period when they were afraid of not winning their seats. That fear has gone. And once the fear has gone, the risk of rebellion grows.
Yes, exactly right. And just before I let you go, we've got a big moment in American politics tomorrow night. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have their first debate, which I think may be what determines who actually ends up getting into the White House. But let me show you a clip which we picked up over the weekend. This is Kamala Harris inexplicably talking about coffee cups.
You know how those lids are, because this is, well, I'm just going to speak, okay? So this is it. So you know how those lids on those Starbucks cups, they're white, right? And so if you wear lipstick, they get all over the lid. And so then I find myself in meetings if I'm the only woman, and that's kind of, and so I keep taking the lid off and having my cup out so that I don't have that big lipstick mark on the lid. So I said, can we do something about the color of the lid?
I mean, I don't know about you, Trevor, but the laughing just is bizarre, isn't it? It's just really weird.
Well, the whole issue is bizarre, isn't it? Are we going to have red lids in future? And do
God knows. I've no idea what she's even talking about.
Types of reds, I don't know. Look, I think, frankly, that the American elections are suddenly becoming extremely interesting, much more interesting than British politics for the time being. And the interesting thing that, to me, is that all the polls are beginning to show that Kamala Harris, that initial honeymoon period as the nominee, have begun to evaporate. Yeah. And that when you scrape back the data, you discover that when the polls are properly applied, she is behind Donald Trump at the moment. And incidents like that, the laughter and the coffee cup, I mean, that was absolutely pathetic stuff. And, you know, this is going to have an effect on those swing voters.
Yeah, I think no question at all. Great to talk to you, Trevor. Thanks very much indeed. Trevor Kavanagh, former political editor there at The Sun.